For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Ryhove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss the Freedom Charter in current times. Welcome, Raymond.
Thank you.
Now, you have said a lot about the background of the Freedom Charter and made some remarks about how we should interpret it, but you have said nothing about whether the goals of the Freedom Charter have been realized.
Yes, I don't like doing it because it's one of these things that's like people treat it a bit like a grocery list and they tick off, you know, the vote tick, freedom of speech tick. And I think that the importance of the Freedom Charter does not lie in the validity of every single word. Even with the Bible, people like Albert Nolan say it is the spirit, not the letter, that counts. And I think that some very important changes did occur in the early years of post-1994 liberation. For example, lots of people got water for the first time, electricity, housing, roads, things like this. Unfortunately, many of those have collapsed through a lack of maintenance and inadequate planning. But it's not to say that nothing has changed. A lot of things. I remember when I first got involved with my wife, I was going to say my present wife, but I've only had one wife. When I got involved, her parents had to go from a village to Queenstown when they wanted to phone us, and that's about 60 miles or something like that, and also very, very early in the morning, unfortunately. But now you have ordinary telephones, but you have lots of cell phones in these areas. I think you have some electricity, whereas in the past you would see the electricity wires going from one white town to the next white town. So I think it's important that we do recognize that some considerable changes were made. I have not done an inventory of the extent to which it has been sustained. There are problems, but I'm sure it's not absolutely collapsed. To me, the most important thing with the Freedom Charter is that we must understand that the Charter represented a broad vision as well as specific problems that people had. So on the one hand, it appealed to universal ideas of freedom. It had ideas of freedom that you will find in other human rights documents like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But the Freedom Charter was made not in the same way as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in boardrooms with experts sitting there, or in the same way as the Constitution. It was made by ordinary people writing their demands on the back of cigarette boxes, on cardboard paper, and in meetings. And the draft that came is reflecting not just broad democratic demands, but also things that worried people only in South Africa at that time. So it's got a sort of untidiness, I think I said in my article. It's not, you know, someone sitting there at a desk and working out exactly how they want things to be. But that is exactly why the Freedom Charter has had such support for so long, because they could recognize themselves in the document. So I think that the spirit of the Freedom Charter may well have been represented in people getting the vote and in certain other gains, or very many gains, that we have seen since 1994, but there have also been setbacks. And I think we have to understand that some of the provisions in the Charter about freedom from arrest and the role of the police as protectors of the people, people don't experience it that way in very many cases. They have their houses knocked down in Operation Fiala, but before that, it's been a daily experience of people who are shack dwellers, people who are foreign migrants, even if their papers are in order. So it's uneven, the way I think it's been implemented, but I don't really want to get into a point by point, because even if the Freedom Charter is out of date, the question is really not to look at the Charter to remedy that. You have a government that is supposed to say, okay, since the Freedom Charter was written, it makes no provision for freedom of sexual orientation. And consequently, the Constitution did that, and it's up to the courts and the police to ensure that people are protected in those rights. So the Freedom Charter is inadequate in that respect, but it wasn't meant to be the final word on everything.
On that note, some people believe that the Freedom Charter should be rewritten or revised to fit in with the 21st century. What are your views on that?
See, the Freedom Charter is like a heritage document. It's like redesigning some statues while they've been standing there for 100 years, or adding on some wagon at the Voortrekker Monument. Now, the Freedom Charter must stand as a part of South Africa's heritage of freedom. And as I said, that doesn't mean that every word in the Freedom Charter is absolutely valid in 2015. A lot of things have happened since then which would cause us to rethink the meanings of the Freedom Charter, different meanings of the people shall govern, or the clauses related to wealth. I interpreted that in the past as referring to nationalization, but must we be absolutely bound to nationalize the banks, the land, everything in the country? And also the complications, because a lot of things that people say should be nationalized are actually already owned by the state, like the mines, and they license it out to companies. So I think these things are complicated, and I think what we have also learned, the time when the Freedom Charter was adopted was a heyday of nationalization. Now, since then, people have come to feel that state-owned entities don't always benefit the poor. Secondly, they may not operate efficiently in the Soviet Union, for example. You saw, because there was not competition, the quality of products was not always good. But that doesn't mean that we must switch over absolutely to privatization. What it means is that every enterprise must be assessed carefully. What we have to ask ourselves is, if you privatize distribution of some things that are basic needs for people, and you put it on the market, some people will not be able to buy it. And private enterprise is not orientated towards meeting the needs of citizens. It is profit orientated. And so what I feel is that the Freedom Charter was not, people need to understand, the Freedom Charter is very different from the Constitution. The Freedom Charter's words are found in the Constitution, more or less, but the Freedom Charter is not an act of Parliament. Now, the Constitution is an act of Parliament, and consequently, you can change it. You can bring it up to date. Now, there's no need to bring the Freedom Charter or the Bible up to date. If you're a believer in the Bible, what you do is you reinterpret it, if necessary, in the conditions of the time. And that is why I don't see why we must revise the Freedom Charter. In any case, it came from a particular gathering. You're not going to get that again.
Well, thank you very much for your insight.
Sure.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about the Freedom Charter today.